Chapter 1. The Bitter Taste of 25. The first thing Mara knew was the cold. It wasn't the familiar chill of her threadbare blanket, but a deeper frost that lived in her bones. Sunlight, thin and pale, sliced through the dusty window of her cabin, landing on the floorboards. 25. The number tasted like ash in her mouth. Another year survived in a place that never felt like home. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the memories came anyway. A flash of smiling faces, her mother's song, her father's strong arms. Then the shattering silence that followed. They said it was rogues. She knew it was just the universe reminding her that everything good gets taken away. Because of that day, she learned that depending on anyone was a fool's game. Consequently, she built her life on the edges of the Blackwood Pack, a ghost in her own territory. Her cabin, nestled deep in the pines, was her fortress. The scent of damp earth and pine needles was her only comfort. She worked, she ate, she slept. She kept her head down. She avoided the pack house, a place buzzing with the warmth of family she'd never have again. Most of all, she avoided him. Kalen, the Alpha's son, the one whose laughter still echoed in her nightmares. A perfect existence required a perfect plan, and hers was simple, yet effective. A sharp rap on the door jolted her. "Mara, open up! Don't you dare pretend you're sleeping!" Lena's voice, bright and insistent, was the one exception to Mara's solitary rule. With a groan, she swung her legs out of bed. The floor was freezing against her bare feet. She pulled the door open to a whirlwind of blonde hair and sunshine. Lena stood there holding a small, slightly lopsided cupcake with a single candle. "Happy birthday," Lena chirped, pushing past her into the cabin. "I know you hate a fuss, so I just made a little fuss." Mara managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Lena." "Don't thank me yet," Lena said, her eyes sparkling with a familiar, dangerous mischief. She set the cupcake on the small wooden table. "You're coming to the Alpha's celebration tonight." The air left Mara's lungs. "No, absolutely not." "Oh, don't be like that. It's Kalen's birthday too, you know. The whole pack has to be there. It's a command from the Alpha." Of course it was his birthday too. The universe loved its cruel little jokes. She remembered another party years ago. She had been foolish, young, and hopeful. She'd thought, maybe he saw her. He had, all right. He'd seen her, cornered her in front of his friends, and with a lazy, cutting smile said, "Why would I ever want a mate as weak as you?" The words had been a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs, breaking something inside her that never quite healed. The laughter that followed was the nail in the coffin of her hope. "I don't care if it's a command from the moon goddess herself," Mara said, her voice low. "I'm not going." Lena's smile faded. "Mara, you can't hide forever. It's been years. He was an idiot teenager." "He's the future Alpha," Mara corrected, her voice brittle. "And he was right. I am weak." It was true, wasn't it? She couldn't fight, couldn't shift into a form that was anything but small and unimpressive. Her wolf was a whisper, not a roar. "That's not true, and you know it. You're the strongest person I know because you've had to be," Lena insisted, grabbing her hands. Her palms were warm. "Please? For me? Come for 1 hour. Have one drink. I won't let anyone bother you. I swear." Mara looked at her friend's pleading face. The thought of the party, of seeing him, made her stomach churn with acid. But the thought of the disappointment in Lena's eyes was somehow worse. It was always easier to face the enemy you knew than to hurt the only friend you had. It was a choice between two poisons, and she always chose the one that hurt only herself. She let out a long, defeated sigh. Fine. The word was a surrender. A white flag raised over her crumbling fortress. 1 hour. Lena's face lit up, a brilliant sunbeam in the gloom of Mara's cabin. "Great. Wear the blue dress." Mara didn't have a blue dress. But as Lena chattered on, Mara felt a familiar, chilling dread creep up her spine. She wasn't just going to a party. She was walking back into the lion's den, and she had a terrible feeling that this time she wouldn't walk out the same. This one choice was about to unravel her entire life. Chapter 2. A Gaze of Ice and Embers. The party was a bonfire roaring against the night sky. Laughter and loud voices tangled with the scent of roasted boar and pine smoke. Pack members, their faces glowing in the flickering light, moved with an easy grace Mara had never possessed. To her, this thrum of pack energy felt like a current trying to pull her under. She clutched the thin fabric of her borrowed dress, feeling like a stray dog that had wandered into a wolf den. Lena had already been swallowed by the crowd, leaving Mara utterly alone. Her goal was simple. Find a drink. Find a shadow. Disappear. She moved along the edge of the clearing, her eyes down. The drink came first. She found a table laden with wooden mugs and a large barrel of mead. The liquid was strong and sweet, and she drank it down fast, hoping it would build a wall inside her, brick by honey-scented brick. It was a stupid hope because she knew some things couldn't be walled off. The first mug was for courage. The second was to forget. She was just starting on the third when she felt it. A sudden shift in the air. A prickling on her skin. Slowly, she lifted her head and saw him. Kalen stood near the heart of the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. He was no longer the arrogant boy from her memories. He was a man now, broad-shouldered and powerful, every inch the alpha heir. He moved with a predator's confidence, a magnetic pull that drew others into his orbit. He was laughing at something one of his betas said, a deep, rumbling sound that made Mara's teeth ache. And then he stopped. His head turned, his eyes scanning the crowd with an unnerving stillness. Their gazes locked. The world went silent. The crackling fire, the raucous laughter, the pounding drums, it all faded into a dull roar. There was only the space between them, charged with something she couldn't name. His eyes weren't just the cold, dismissive gray she remembered. Tonight, in the firelight, they held something else. Embers glowed in their depths, something ancient, something wild. A muscle in his jaw twitched. For a split second, his carefully constructed mask of indifference cracked. She saw a flash of something. Shock? Recognition? Before she could decipher it, a low sound vibrated through the air, too quiet for anyone else to hear over the party. A growl. It wasn't a threat. It was something else entirely. Possessive. Primal. It was the sound of his wolf, and it was aimed directly at her. Just as quickly as it appeared, the expression vanished. His face went smooth, his eyes turning to chips of ice. He looked at her, then through her, as if she were nothing more than a gnat buzzing at the edge of his vision. The public dismissal was so complete, so familiar, that it hit her harder than any physical blow could have. The old wound, scarred over but never healed, ripped open. The heat of humiliation crawled up her neck. He was playing with her. He had to be. What other reason could there be for a look like that? Still lurking in the shadows, Mara? A voice sneered beside her. It was Reese, one of Kalen's closest cronies. The mead, her courage, and her pain all collided in a fiery explosion inside her chest. Normally, she would have shrunk away, made herself smaller, but not tonight. Tonight was her 25th birthday. She was tired of being small. Better than standing in a false light, Reese, she shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. His eyes widened in surprise. A few people nearby turned to look. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was bad. Drawing attention was the last thing she wanted. Across the fire, she saw Kalen's head tilt. He was watching them. His expression was unreadable, but his focus was absolute. Panic seized her. She had to leave. Now. She turned, downing the rest of her mead in one desperate gulp. The world tilted on its axis. The lights of the bonfire began to swim, blurring into streaks of orange and gold. The sounds warped, voices stretching into meaningless drones. She stumbled away from the table, away from Reese's shocked face, away from Kaylin's burning stare. Her only thought was to make it back to the safety of the trees, back to the silence of her cabin. But her legs felt like lead, and the world was spinning faster and faster, pulling her down into a vortex of noise and confusion and darkness. Chapter 3. The scent of fate consciousness returned in pieces. First, a dull, throbbing ache behind her eyes. Then, the feel of something impossibly soft against her skin. Silk? Her sheets were rough, worn cotton. A scent filled her lungs, completely alien. Not the familiar smell of pine and damp earth from her cabin. This was different. It was rich, masculine, a heady mix of spice and musk and something else. Something wild and elemental that called to a part of her she kept locked away. Her eyes snapped open. Panic clawed its way up her throat. This wasn't her room. This chamber was vast, furnished with dark, heavy wood and rich furs. A stone fireplace, cold and empty, dominated one wall. This was the Alpha's lodge. And this was his son's room. She threw the silk sheets back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was still in her dress from last night. Nothing seemed out of place, yet everything was terrifyingly wrong. Then she saw him. Kaylin sat in a large armchair in the corner of the room, perfectly still, watching her. He was already dressed in dark pants and a simple tunic, his black hair still damp. His face was a mask of stone, revealing nothing of what he was thinking. How did she get here? What had he done? Before she could find her voice to scream, a different voice echoed in the cavern of her skull. It wasn't a sound her ears could hear. It was a thought, a feeling, a word that vibrated through her very soul. It was deep, possessive, and utterly certain. Mine. She flinched, clutching her head. The word wasn't hers. It was a rumbling, primal claim that originated from the silent man across the room. It wasn't from his mouth, it was from his wolf. A raw, telepathic brand being seared onto her spirit. The shock gave way to a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated rage. A cruel joke. This had to be the ultimate humiliation, a twisted game to finally break her completely. He must have planned this. He had to have. "What is this?" she finally managed to choke out, her voice raw. She scrambled to the edge of the bed, putting as much distance between them as possible. "What did you do to me?" Kaylin rose from the chair. He didn't move with anger, or even with the arrogance she expected. He moved with a heavy sense of finality, like a judge about to deliver a verdict that could not be appealed. There was no apology in his eyes, no warmth, no hint of the possessive heat she felt from his wolf. There was only a cold, hard emptiness that chilled her to the core. This disconnect between the man and his beast was the most terrifying thing of all. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, because a part of him was at war with the other. He stopped a few feet from the bed, his formidable presence sucking all the air from the room. His gray eyes, now devoid of any fire, held hers. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. She wanted him to yell, to confess to his cruel prank, to give her something, anything, to fight against. But he gave her nothing. Just that unnerving calm, that complete control. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice he'd used all those years ago when he'd shattered her world. "I didn't choose this." He paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. His gaze held hers, a silent sentence of doom. Fate did. Chapter 4. The Mark of Ruin. The two words echoed in the cavernous room. Fate did. They were not an apology. They were a sentence. Mara stared at Kaylin, her mind refusing to process the sheer, calamitous absurdity of it all. Fate didn't hand out blessings to people like her. It delivered curses wrapped in pretty paper. This, being shackled to the one man who represented all her pain, was the cruelest curse imaginable. Denial, hot and sharp, was her only shield. This immediate situation called for a swift exit, so she threw her legs over the side of the bed, her muscles screaming in protest. This is a lie, a sick game. Her voice was a ragged whisper. She needed to get out, to feel the cold forest air on her skin and wash his scent away. The scent was everywhere, on the sheets, in the air, a constant reminder of this nightmare. Her entire life she had fought for control, and she was losing it. As a result of this mounting panic, she scrambled for the heavy oak door, her hand shaking as she reached for the iron handle. The moment her fingers brushed the cold metal, an invisible wall slammed into her. The force was immense, a physical manifestation of pure will that threw her backward. She landed hard on the fur rug, the air knocked from her lungs. She looked up at Kalen, who hadn't moved an inch. It wasn't him who had stopped her. It was his wolf. A silent, inescapable command that her own weaker wolf had no choice but to obey. This bond wasn't a connection. It was a cage. "You can't run from this, Mara," he said, his voice as flat and hard as slate. "Watch me," she snarled, pushing herself up. "It won't work," he continued, ignoring her defiance. "The bond is new. It's volatile. My wolf will not allow you to be far from me." He spoke of his wolf as a separate being, a jailer he had no control over. "For now, you are a part of my territory. It will protect its territory." "Protection?" She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You call this a cage, Kalen. Don't dress it up as anything else." A flicker of something, frustration maybe, crossed his face before it was gone. "The pack will be gathering for the morning meal. They will know the moment they see us." His words were a threat, a promise of the humiliation to come. "Your only chance of surviving the whispers and the stares is to stand by my side. They will not challenge what their future alpha has claimed." He was offering her a shield, but it felt like he was branding her. With no other option, she followed him out of the room, her every step a defeat. The main hall of the lodge was filled with the low hum of conversation and the smell of breakfast. The moment they appeared at the top of the grand staircase, a hush fell over the room. One by one, heads turned. Noses lifted subtly, eyes widened. She could feel it, the exact moment they scented the change. His powerful, unmistakable alpha scent was now wrapped around her, marking her as his. The whispers started instantly, a serpent slithering through the crowd. Kalen descended the stairs, his back ramrod straight, pulling her along in his wake. He stopped at the bottom, his voice ringing out with an authority that left no room for argument. "The moon goddess has made her choice." It wasn't a happy announcement. It was a formal decree. He wasn't accepting her. He was acknowledging a fact. Trapped in the spotlight of 100 pairs of eyes, she felt him lean close, his breath a warm shock against her ear, the sensation sending an unwanted shiver through her. "Stay close," he murmured, the command a low growl. "And do not show them fear." The words were meant to sound like advice, but she knew what they truly were. The first set of rules for her new life as his prisoner. Chapter 5. The Space Between. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. Mara was moved into a chamber in the lodge, a room with a soft bed and a window that overlooked the forest she could no longer run to. It was a gilded cage, and Kalen was the ever-present warden. Pack law, reinforced by the tyrannical pull of the new bond, tethered her to his side. They ate together in suffocating silence. They walked the territory with a chasm of unspoken hostility between them. She felt the constant, simmering need of his wolf, a low thrum beneath her skin that was both terrifying and compelling. Because of this new reality, she was forced to attend a pack council meeting, seated beside him at the head of a massive wooden table. The elders watched her with open disapproval, their gazes dissecting her for the weakness Kalen had once named. They discussed a border dispute with the Shadowclaw pack, a growing threat from the north. The name of their alpha, Valerius, was spoken with a mix of fear and contempt. Mara tried to make herself small, to fade into the woodwork, but the bond made her a beacon. During a recess, the devil himself appeared. Alpha Valerius strode into the hall, flanked by two of his largest warriors. He was nothing like the brutes of their own pack. He was sleek and handsome, with silver hair and eyes the color of a winter storm. He moved with a dancer's grace, his smile a flash of white in a predator's face. "Kaelin," Valerius purred, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I came to offer my congratulations." His gaze slid from Kaelin to Mara, lingering with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Such a delicate flower to find among the blackwood thorns, a rare prize. Mara stiffened. The words were a veiled insult and a clear challenge. "You must guard her carefully," Valerius continued, his smile widening. "Pretty things are so easily broken." Before Mara could even react, Kaelin moved. He shifted, placing his body partially in front of hers, a solid wall of muscle and fury. His hand landed on the small of her back, a shocking, searing touch that sent a jolt straight through her. It was the first time he had touched her voluntarily. The contact was electric. "My mate!" Kaelin bit out, his voice dropping to a lethal growl that was pure wolf. "Is not your concern, Valerius." The air crackled with tension. Valerius's charming facade didn't slip, but a dangerous light danced in his eyes. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he gave a slight bow. "Of course." He smirked. "My apologies." He turned and walked away, leaving a trail of cold dread in his wake. The encounter left Mara trembling, not from fear of Valerius, but from the confusing, overwhelming response to Kaelin's actions. For one fleeting moment, his touch had felt like a shield, not a shackle. The thought was so unwelcome, so dangerously seductive, that it terrified her. The spot on her back where his hand had been still burned. Later that evening, she found him staring out at the forest from a stone balcony. "I don't need your protection," she said, the words coming out harsher than she intended. He turned slowly, his eyes blazing with the same embers she'd seen at the bonfire. The raw power rolling off him was staggering. "You have no idea what you need," he snarled, his voice a torrent of restrained violence. He pushed past her and stormed back inside, leaving her alone with the cold night air and the even colder realization that the line between her hatred for him and this terrifying magnetic pull was beginning to dissolve. Chapter 6. The Unbreakable Chain. The pressure from the pack had been building for days, a slow, crushing weight. It culminated in a formal summons. The elders, along with Kaelin's father, Alpha Boren, requested a meeting in the Alpha's study. There was no doubt about the topic. Her, the weak, unsuitable mate for their future leader. Mara knew what they wanted: rejection. The word itself was a blade. A part of her craved it, longed for the severing of this unnatural chain so she could retreat back to her quiet, lonely life. It would mean freedom. Yet, a deeper, more treacherous part of her recoiled at the thought. The bond, as much as she hated it, was now a part of her. To have it ripped away by force, she suspected the pain would be unlike anything she had ever known. It was an impossible conflict, to wish for a freedom that would likely destroy you. So she felt completely and utterly lost. She was made to wait outside the heavy study doors, a supplicant awaiting her own execution. Raised voices bled through the thick wood. She couldn't make out the words, but the tones were clear. Alpha Boren's angry, booming commands, the elders' stern, insistent arguments, and Kaelin's voice lower but sharp with a tension that vibrated through the floor. She paced the stone hallway, her arms wrapped around herself. He would do it. Of course he would. He never wanted this. It was the only logical choice to put his pack, his birthright, before a woman he clearly despised. The silence that fell was more terrifying than the shouting. Finally, the door creaked open. Kaelin emerged, his face carved from granite. He looked right through her and stalked down the hall toward an outer balcony that overlooked the vast, moon-drenched forest. Her heart sank. This was it. He was going to tell her it was done. Her legs, moving on their own accord, followed him into the chilly night air. He stood with his back to her, gripping the stone railing so tightly his knuckles were white. The moonlight traced the powerful lines of his shoulders, tense with a fight she could only guess at. "Are you going to do it?" Her voice was a fragile whisper, easily stolen by the breeze. "Are you rejecting me?" For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, he spoke, his voice rough. "They want me to. They say you are a liability, a weakness for the pack." He turned around slowly, and the sight of his face stole her breath. The cold mask was gone. In its place was a raw, wild torment. His eyes were a raging storm of gray and silver, the battle between the man and his wolf playing out in their depths. "My father commands me to choose the pack over." He gestured vaguely to the space between them. "This." She braced herself, her body tensing for the final killing blow. He took a step closer and then another until he was standing right in front of her. The heat coming off him was immense. He smelled of night air and rage. She could see the pulse beating in his throat, a frantic, untamed rhythm. "Let them talk," he whispered, and the sound was a ragged snarl, torn from deep within his chest. His eyes burned into hers, trapping her, branding her. "I would rather break myself than let you go." The words were not a promise of love. They were a declaration of possession, a vow of mutual destruction. He wasn't choosing her. He was refusing to give her up. In that moment, staring into his tormented eyes, Mara understood with a horrifying clarity. She wasn't his mate. She was his obsession, his curse, and there was no escape for either of them. Chapter 7. Cracks in the Stone. Sleep offered no escape. Not for her, and apparently not for him either. Mara lay in her gilded cage of a room, staring at the moonlight painting stripes across the floor. A strange disquiet hummed beneath her skin, an anxious thrum that wasn't her own. It was a faint echo from down the hall, a thread of distress tugging at her through the unwanted bond. It was Kalen. She told herself it didn't matter. His suffering was his own, a problem for the cold, stone-faced alpha heir to deal with. Still, the feeling persisted, a splinter under her skin. Curiosity, ugly and insistent, was a powerful motivator. Understanding her captor was a matter of survival, she reasoned, a way to find a weakness in the walls he'd built around them both. That's why she found herself slipping out of her room, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floors of the sleeping lodge. His door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling into the hall. The feeling of distress was stronger here, a palpable aura of pain. Hesitantly, she peered inside. Kalen was tangled in his sheets, his body tense. He was caught in the grips of a nightmare, his head tossing back and forth on the pillow. A low sound, a wounded and broken thing escaped his lips. It was a name, she thought, whispered in agony. His face, usually a mask of controlled indifference, was twisted in torment. In the pale moonlight, she saw him clearly for the first time, not as a monster, not as a future alpha, but as a man who was haunted. A faint, silvery line traced the edge of his collarbone, a scar she'd never noticed. It was old, and it looked like it had been carved by a claw. This new detail, this evidence of a past injury, chipped away at her armor. What could have hurt him so badly? What specter chased him in his sleep? This small imperfection made him terrifyingly human, which was far more dangerous than the monster she had imagined. An instinct she couldn't name, a pull from the deepest parts of her own neglected wolf, urged her forward. She took a single, silent step into the room. The thought was absurd, to offer comfort to the source of her misery, but the urge was undeniable. As if her presence had broken a spell, his eyes flew open. They locked onto hers, and for one heart-stopping second she saw no anger. She saw only raw, unguarded terror. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost, a soul-deep horror that had nothing to do with her. Then it was gone. In the blink of an eye, the walls slammed back into place. The icy mask descended colder and harder than ever before. He pushed himself up against the headboard, turning his face away as if the sight of her was physically painful. "Get out!" he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly thing ripped from a raw throat. She didn't need to be told twice. Mara retreated, pulling the door softly shut behind her. She fled back to the cold safety of her room, but the image of his terrified eyes was burned into her mind. The Alpha Heir wasn't just cruel, he was broken, and his secrets were a darkness that she was beginning to fear might just swallow them both. Chapter 8. The Spark and the Snarl. The next morning, the air between them was sharp and thin, like glass about to shatter. He found her by the edge of the woods, the memory of his nightmare a raw, unspoken accusation in the space they shared. Kalen didn't waste time with pleasantries. His eyes, cold once more, raked over her with a critical gaze. "You're a target," he stated, his voice flat. "Valerius sees you as a vulnerability. Your weakness puts this pack, and me, at risk. That ends today. I'm training you." Fury, hot and immediate, flared in her chest. Not just for the insult, but for his sheer arrogance. After she saw his weakness, he needed to reassert his dominance over her, to prove he was still the one in control. Her chin lifted. "I don't need your help." "This isn't an offer," he bit out, already striding toward the packed earth training circle. "It's a command." The training was a special kind of brutality. He came at her relentlessly, his movements a blur of controlled power. It was clear he was holding his true strength back, yet he still pushed her to the very edge of her endurance. Each block, each dodge, each failed strike was a fresh humiliation. "Is that all you have?" he taunted, easily sidestepping her clumsy lunge. "The whispers in the pack are true. There's no fire in you." His words were calculated barbs, designed to provoke, and they worked. The anger she had been simmering in for days finally boiled over. It burned away her fear, her exhaustion, her doubt. Something inside her snapped. She stopped thinking and started reacting, her body moving with an instinct she didn't know she possessed. She began to anticipate his attacks, using her smaller size to her advantage, twisting away from his power and looking for openings. The dynamic shifted. It was no longer a lesson. It was a fight. The air grew thick with the scent of their exertion, of damp earth and sweat and something else. Something electric. The clash of their bodies, the slide of his arm against hers, the heat of his breath as he moved in close. It all blurred the line between combat and a dangerous dance. He feinted left, and she saw it coming. Instead of retreating, she dropped low and drove her shoulder into his legs. He was too surprised to react. His balance shattered, and he went down with a grunt of shock. In a flash, she was on top of him, her knees pinning his arms, her body straddling his. Silence. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her hair falling into her face. She had won. She looked down, and the sight below stole the air from her lungs. Kalen stared up at her, his lips parted in surprise. The cold fury in his eyes was gone, melted away by the heat of the fight. In its place was a raw, undisguised hunger that made her entire body light up with a fire of its own. The world narrowed to the few inches between their faces. He lifted his head slightly, his gaze dropping to her mouth. His intent was unmistakable. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of fear and a terrifying, traitorous desire. Just as his lips were about to meet hers, a vicious, guttural snarl ripped through the air. Mine. The sound was a shock of cold water. It came from him, from the wolf inside him. It was a jealous, possessive roar directed not at an enemy, but at the man. At Kalen himself, for daring to touch what the beast considered its sole property. The moment shattered into a million pieces. Kalen's eyes flared with a look of furious self-loathing. With a surge of strength, he shoved her off him, scrambling to his feet as if she had burned him. Without a single word, he turned and stalked away, leaving her sitting in the dirt, her lips tingling with the ghost of a kiss that never happened. Chapter 9. Blood and Belonging. For 2 days, Kaylin avoided her. The charged memory of their near kiss was a raw, festering wound between them, an invisible wall that was somehow more solid than stone. So, when Alpha Boran assigned them to patrol the northern border, the one that brushed against Valerius's territory, it felt less like a duty and more like a punishment. A deliberate act of throwing 2 combustible elements into a sealed container to see what would happen. They moved through the ancient, silent forest, the only sound the crunch of leaves under their boots. The silence was a living thing, thick with unspoken words and the electric tension that now permanently defined their existence. Mara found herself watching him, not with fear, but with a new awareness. He wasn't just walking. He was scanning, his head constantly moving, his senses stretched to their limit. He was a guardian on his walls, and whether she liked it or not, she was the territory he was defending. The attack came without warning. A whistle of air, a sharp thunk. An arrow, black-feathered and deadly, embedded itself in the trunk of a tree, inches from her head. Ambush. 3 enormous feral wolves exploded from the undergrowth. They were rogues, their fur matted and their eyes burning with a rabid light, but they moved with an unnatural coordination. Kaylin didn't hesitate. A ripple of energy, a tearing sound, and the man was gone. In his place stood a massive black wolf, a creature of shadow and fury, his size easily dwarfing the attackers. He immediately put himself between Mara and the charging rogues, a living shield of muscle and fang. He met the first 2 with a deafening roar, a clash of teeth and claws, but the third was clever. It circled wide, its yellow eyes locked on her. It saw the weaker prey. Her own wolf, a creature of quiet defiance, rose up inside her. Adrenaline surged, sharp and metallic. She couldn't fight it head-on, but she could outthink it. She darted away, not in a straight line, but weaving between the thick, ancient trees. The rogue followed, its heavy footfalls crashing behind her. She led it straight toward a dense thicket of thorny vines, a wall of natural razors. At the last second, she dropped and rolled. The rogue, unable to stop its momentum, plunged headfirst into the snare, howling in pain and fury as the thorns dug into its hide. A pained snarl from behind her spun her around. Kaylin had taken down one rogue, but the other had gotten past his guard, its claws leaving a deep, bleeding gash along his shoulder. He stumbled, his massive form faltering for just a second. It was all the opening the other rogue needed. It lunged for his exposed throat. Time seemed to slow. There was no thought, only instinct, a primal, desperate need to protect. She shifted back to human form, her eyes scanning the forest floor. Her hands found it, a heavy, fallen oak branch, thick as her thigh. With a scream of pure adrenaline, she charged. She swung the branch with all the strength she possessed. The impact, a sickening, wet crack, echoed through the quiet forest. The rogue crumpled to the ground. The last attacker, seeing its companion fall and hearing Kaylin's renewed furious roar, turned and fled into the woods. Silence descended, broken only by their ragged breathing. Kaylin shifted back, a man once more, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He stared at her, his gray eyes wide. The coldness, the anger, the control. It was all stripped away. All that was left was shock, pain, and something else she had never seen there before. Awe. He looked at her not as a burden, not as a weakness, but as an equal. The bond between them flared to life, not as a chain, but as a lifeline of shared survival and mutual respect. She looked back at the man she had just saved, the Alpha she was so certain she hated, and a dangerous world-altering question bloomed in the silence of her heart. What if fate didn't make a mistake? Chapter 10. The Illusion of Independence. In the wake of the ambush, something had shifted. The pack members who once looked at Mara with disdain now held a glint of grudging respect in their eyes. They whispered about the rogue she had felled, the Alpha she had saved. Kalen was a constant, brooding presence at her side, his gaze a weight she felt even when her back was turned. This new connection, this fragile truce born from shared violence, terrified her more than their hatred ever had. The question that had taken root in her heart, what if fate didn't make a mistake, was a dangerous seed, threatening to grow into something that could shatter the walls she had spent a lifetime building. Because of this terrifying new vulnerability, she felt a desperate need to push back, to re-establish the distance that had kept her safe. She had to prove, to him and to herself, that she was not his possession. She was her own person. Her survival had never depended on anyone else, and it wouldn't start now. An opportunity presented itself in the bustling great hall during the evening meal. The air was warm, filled with the scent of roasted chicken and the low murmur of 100 conversations. The moment was small, almost unnoticeable, but it felt like a turning point. She was reaching for a piece of bread when Kalen, seated beside her, picked it up first and placed it on her plate. It was a simple, almost domestic gesture of care, but in the public eye of the pack, it was a declaration. He was providing for her. He was claiming her, and she rejected it. "I can get my own bread, Kalen," she said. Her voice was too loud, too sharp, cutting through the nearby chatter. The hall around them didn't fall silent, but a pocket of quiet formed, spreading like ripples in a pond. She stood up, pushing her chair back with a scrape that echoed her grating tone. "I'm not a fragile doll that needs tending to. I can take care of myself." The words hung in the air, a public slap in the face. She saw the hurt flash in his eyes, quickly extinguished and replaced by the familiar glacial coldness she knew so well. It was a victory, but it tasted like ash. He rose slowly to his feet, his height and power a suffocating presence. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, dangerous whisper that only she could hear. "Fine," he said, the single word laced with ice. "Take care of yourself." He turned and walked away, not with the storming fury she expected, but with a chilling finality. He moved through the crowd, and it was as if a shield had been lowered between them, the warmth of the bond vanishing, leaving only a cold, empty ache. She stood alone, the center of 100 curious stares. Her act of independence had only succeeded in isolating her completely. From across the hall, near the shadows of the main entrance, a figure watched. It was one of Valerius's betas, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. He had seen the crack form in the Alpha Heirs Foundation. He had seen the prize, now seemingly unguarded. Mara sank back into her chair, the bread on her plate feeling as heavy as a stone. She had wanted to prove she was strong enough to stand alone, but she had only succeeded in showing her enemies exactly where to strike. Chapter 11. The price of a soul night fell, but the cold distance Kalen had created remained. The bond, once a humming, vibrant thing, was now a frayed wire, transmitting only a dull, throbbing ache that resonated deep in her bones. It was his pain, his anger, and it was becoming unbearable. After hours of staring at the walls of her room, she couldn't take it anymore. She wasn't sure what she was going to do, apologize, yell, demand answers. But she knew she had to find him. The bond, a cruel and demanding master, pulled her from her room and down into the silent, sleeping heart of the lodge. The trail of his suffering led her not to the training grounds or the forest, but to a place she'd only heard whispers of, an ancient cavern deep beneath the pack house, a place of old magic and forgotten rituals. The air grew colder as she descended the winding stone steps. She found him in the center of the cavern, bathed in the faint, ethereal light of glowing moss on the walls. He wasn't just angry. He was in agony. He stood with his back to her, his body rigid, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Thin, silvery lines of energy, like living scars, pulsed with a sickly light across his bare back and arms. He was fighting something, an invisible enemy that was tearing him apart from the inside. "What's wrong with you?" she whispered, the question filled with a dread that had nothing to do with her earlier anger. He flinched but didn't turn. "You wanted to be alone," he bit out, his voice strained. So be alone. Get out of here, Mara. No. The word was out before she could stop it. The bond was screaming at her, a silent, frantic warning that he was in terrible danger. Not until you tell me what this is. You don't want to know, he growled, a sound of pure anguish. She took a step closer. I'm not leaving. With a roar of fury and despair, he spun around. The glowing lines now traced his face, his chest. His eyes were wild with a pain she couldn't comprehend. Backed into a corner, with her refusing to leave, the truth finally tore from him. It's a curse, he yelled, the words echoing off the damp cavern walls. A curse on my bloodline, placed by a witch my ancestor wronged centuries ago. He paced like a caged animal, the story pouring out of him in a torrent of bitterness. It lies dormant. It sleeps. Until the alpha heir finds his true mate, our bond. It woke it up. It feeds it. He stopped, his chest heaving, his gaze locking on her with an expression of utter horror. If the bond is completed, if I claim you fully, the curse will drain your life force. It will consume your spirit to amplify my own, to ensure the alpha line remains strong. He choked on the words, his voice breaking. It will kill you, Mara. The world tilted and fell away. Everything. His cruelty at that party years ago, an act designed to drive her away before their fated birthdays, could seal this doom. His coldness now, a desperate, constant battle to keep her at arm's length. His nightmares, his refusal to reject her. It wasn't pride. It was a terrible, hopeless attempt to save her life. Her fury, her resentment, it all evaporated, replaced by a wave of cold, nauseating horror that stole the breath from her lungs. The mate bond wasn't a gift. It was a death sentence. Now you see, he whispered, his voice shattered. Now you know why I told you to stay away. Chapter 12, A Vow in the Darkness. The cavern was silent, save for the sound of their ragged breathing and the slow drip of water from the stone ceiling. The truth of Kaelin's words settled over Mara, a suffocating shroud. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant alpha heir, but a man carrying a burden that was slowly crushing him. A man condemned to either live alone or kill the one person fate had chosen for him. Her heart, a thing she had guarded so fiercely, ached for him. Before she could form a single word, a shadow detached itself from the cavern entrance. A smooth, mocking voice slid through the darkness. How tragic. Alpha Valerius emerged from the gloom, two of his most formidable warriors flanking him. His silver eyes gleamed with predatory delight. He had followed them. He had heard everything. I must say, Kaelin, your family has a flair for the dramatic, Valerius purred, circling them like a shark. A cursed bloodline, a deadly mate. I saw your little spat in the hall, saw how easily you cast her aside. You left a priceless treasure completely unguarded. Kaelin, still weakened from his battle with the curse, moved to stand in front of Mara. Valerius, this is not your affair. Oh, I'm making it my affair, the other alpha replied with a vicious smile. A mate with such a unique predicament is far too valuable to be left with someone who can't even touch her. I, on the other hand, have no such limitations. He lunged. The attack was blindingly fast. Kaelin met him, a blur of motion, but he was at a disadvantage. The fight was a desperate, brutal ballet of shadows and silver light. Valerius was a master of his craft, his movements fluid and deadly, his aim not to kill Kaelin, but to get past him, to get to her. He succeeded. One of his guards engaged Kaelin, and Valerius sidestepped, his hand shooting out to grab Mara's arm. His grip was like iron. No! Kaelin roared. As Valerius yanked her away, her free hand brushed against Kaelin's. The skin-on-skin contact, charged with the pure terror of the moment, was like setting a match to gasoline. The bond between them exploded. A visible wave of black, crackling energy erupted from Kaelin, the curse surging to the surface. He screamed, a sound of pure agony and untamed power. The wave of raw energy slammed into Valerius, throwing him back against the cavern wall with enough force to crack the stone. Valerius stared, his charming facade finally breaking to reveal shock and a hint of fear. He had expected a wolf. He had not expected this dark, volatile magic. Scrambling to his feet, he gave a sharp nod to his guards. This was a battle he wasn't prepared for. Not yet. "This changes things," Valerius snarled before melting back into the shadows from which he came. The dark energy receded, leaving Kaelin on one knee, panting, his body trembling with the aftershock. He had almost lost her. The reality of it hung between them, a fear more potent than any curse. They were no longer just fighting a bloodline affliction. They were fighting an enemy who knew their greatest weakness. Kaelin looked up at her, his eyes filled with a new, terrifying resolve. The man who had been resigned to his fate was gone. In his place was a warrior with a new purpose. "I'll break it," he vowed, his voice raw with pain and unbreakable promise. "I'll find a way to break the curse, or I'll die trying." Chapter 13. A Choice of Thorns. The aftermath of Valerius's attack left a ringing silence in its wake. Back in the lodge, the reality of their situation was a third person in the room, cold and suffocating. Kaelin stood by the window, a silhouette against the moon. The walls he'd been building his whole life back in place, higher and more formidable than ever. The vulnerability she'd seen in the cavern was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "I can arrange it," he said, his voice flat, not looking at her. "A neutral territory. The Silver Moon Pack owes my father a debt. You would be safe there, away from Valerius, away from me." He was offering her an escape, the one thing she had craved since this nightmare began. Safety. Freedom. A life where she didn't have to fear a rival alpha or a cursed love. It was everything she should have wanted. But as she looked at his rigid back, at the lonely posture of a man preparing to fight a war on his own, she felt an unexpected and fierce rebellion. He was willing to face this darkness alone to save her. Because of this, she finally understood. Running away wasn't strength. It was an abdication. It was letting the past, the curse, and their enemies win. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it held the weight of an oath. He finally turned, a flicker of surprise in his tormented eyes. "Mara, you don't understand. Staying here—" "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, taking a step toward him. "You think you can make this decision for me, to lock me away for my own good. You don't get to do that anymore, Kaelin." She took another step, her own resolve hardening into something sharp and clear. "This curse, it didn't just happen to you. When fate tied me to you, it chose me too. It made this my fight. I'm not running from it. We fight this. Together." Her choice, her defiant ownership of their shared doom, seemed to shatter his composure. The iron control in his expression crumbled, revealing the raw, aching vulnerability beneath. For the first time, he looked at her not as a liability or a temptation, but as an ally, as his equal. In that moment, they weren't captor and captive, or alpha and outcast. They were just a man and a woman, standing on the edge of an abyss, choosing to face it together. The unspoken gravity of her decision pulled him across the space between them. He stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming. Slowly, as if afraid she might break, he lifted a hand and gently cupped her face. His thumb stroked her cheek, a touch so full of reverence and sorrow it made her heart ache. He leaned in, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not the fiery, possessive claiming she had imagined. It was something far more devastating. It was slow and gentle and filled with the crushing weight of everything they couldn't have. It was a taste of hope and a lifetime of regret, a desperate, silent prayer in the darkness. It was the most painful, beautiful thing she had ever felt. Just as quickly, he pulled away. The anguish in his eyes was a physical blow. "We can't," he whispered, the words ragged. The curse was there between them, a cold and tangible barrier. The chapter of their lives had a new title now, one they would have to find a way to rewrite to change the ending of the story. Chapter 14. Whispers in the Archives. Their fragile alliance found its purpose in the dust and silence of the pack archives. The chamber, tucked away in the oldest part of the lodge, smelled of aging paper, cracked leather, and forgotten time. Here, surrounded by the ghosts of their ancestors, they began their war. They weren't looking for a weapon of steel, but one of knowledge. A name, a weakness, a single crack in the curse's foundation. Side by side, they worked through stacks of brittle scrolls and heavy, cloth-bound tomes. The forced proximity that had once been a torment now became a strange sort of comfort. A quiet, focused rhythm developed between them. He would pass her a heavy book, their fingers brushing for a fleeting moment. She would point to a line of faded text, her shoulder pressing against his. They were two scholars, two soldiers, two pieces of a puzzle trying to solve itself. In the quiet intimacy of their shared task, a trust began to grow, more real and profound than any faded bond. Consequently, days blurred into a haze of research. It was Mara who found it, tucked away in the personal journal of a Luna from 3 centuries past. Her handwriting was a delicate, spidery script, her words filled with the sorrow of her time. She wrote of the witch's terrible curse upon her alpha. But then came the secret, a detail history had conveniently erased. The witch was powerful, the Luna wrote, but our wards were absolute. She could never have breached them alone. Mara's breath caught. She read the next line aloud, her voice a hushed whisper in the silent room. She had help. From within. Lord Eddard of the Nightshade family, bitter from a slight to his honor, lowered the wards for her in the dead of night. Kaelin went still beside her. Nightshade, he breathed, the name a venomous hiss. That line died out 200 years ago. There are no nightshades left. Aren't there? Mara asked softly, a cold dread seeping into her. Families don't just vanish. They change their names. They blend in. They wait. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The enemy wasn't just a rival pack or an ancient curse. The enemy was here, inside their walls, a serpent they had nurtured in their own garden for generations. The circle of who they could trust shrank with terrifying speed until it contained only the two of them. Who was it? One of the elders? Kaelin's own father? Every friendly face was now a potential mask for a traitor. Exhaustion, both physical and emotional, finally claimed them. They didn't leave the archives. The thought of facing the pack with this poisonous new knowledge was too much. He sat slumped in a chair on one side of the massive reading table, his head in his hands. Mara curled up on a worn divan on the other side. Surrounded by the whispers of the past, they drifted into an uneasy sleep. In the deep quiet of the night, Mara's eyes fluttered open. Across the room, Kaelin was asleep, his head resting on his folded arms on the table. For the first time since she'd met him, his face was completely unguarded and peaceful. The lines of pain and tension were gone, leaving him looking younger, almost vulnerable. The urge to go to him, to smooth the hair from his forehead, to offer a comfort that was utterly forbidden, was a fierce, burning ache in her chest. They had never been closer, yet an entire world of danger kept them apart. Chapter 15. The Serpent in the Garden. The new day did not bring clarity, only the cold, hard certainty of their isolation. They had a name, Nightshade, but it was a ghost, a phantom lineage with no face. Kaelin knew that a direct accusation would be madness. It would splinter the pack, show his hand to the traitor, and likely get them both killed. He needed a different approach. He had to force the serpent to reveal itself. That afternoon, he called a formal council meeting. Mara sat by his side, her presence a silent statement of their unity. The elders and his father, Alpha Borin, gathered around the great table, their faces etched with confusion and suspicion. Kaelin did not speak of curses or traitors. Instead, he spoke of strength and history. "Our northern border was breached too easily," he began, his voice calm and measured. "It has led me to believe that the foundational wards of our territory may have weakened over time. I am commissioning an outsider, a specialist in ancient wardcraft, to conduct a full investigation into their historical integrity." He paused, letting his eyes sweep over each elder. "He will begin his work by examining the era of Alpha Theron the Black, the time when the first records of significant rogue incursions began." It was a brilliant lie, a perfectly aimed stone cast into a still pond. It was also his point of no return. He was publicly announcing his intention to dig into the exact moment in history when the curse was born, tying his future, and Mara's, to whatever truth he unearthed. Most of the elders murmured in agreement, but one did not. Elder Theron, a man known for his staunch traditionalism and unwavering loyalty, stiffened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of pure panic flashed in his eyes before being expertly masked. "An outsider?" Theron boomed, his voice full of manufactured outrage. "Unacceptable! The secrets of our pack are our own. We do not air our history for others to inspect. It is a breach of all tradition." "The tradition of our pack's security is more important," Kaelin countered, his voice like steel. Alpha Boren, though clearly reluctant, nodded his assent. The future Alpha had given a command. "The investigation will proceed," Kaelin declared, his authority absolute. The meeting was over. As they left the council chamber, Mara knew they had their man. Theron was a nightshade. They had poked the serpent. Now they had to wait for it to strike. The strike came that evening. It was not a violent attack. It was something far more insidious. Left on the doorstep of Mara's chamber was a small, unassuming bundle of dark cloth. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside, nestled on the cloth, was a cluster of glossy black berries. Nightshade, a deadly poison. There was no note. There didn't need to be. It was a clear, silent message delivered from the shadows. "I know that you know. Stop digging. Or the next time, this will not be a warning." Chapter 16. A Poisoned Truth. The silent thread of the nightshade berries had coiled around them, a serpent of fear in their small sanctuary of two. They knew Theron was the traitor, a ghost wearing the face of a friend, but they had no proof, only the whispers from a dead Luna's journal. Kaelin was a shadow at Mara's side, his protective presence a constant suffocating heat. Every friendly face in the pack was now a potential mask, every smile a possible lie. They were walking on a knife's edge, waiting for the serpent to strike again. But Theron didn't use venom. He used the truth. He called for an emergency assembly that evening, his voice ringing with false urgency. The entire pack gathered in the great hall, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Theron stood before Alpha Boren, his expression a carefully crafted mask of somber duty. Mara stood beside Kaelin, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. This was it. "My Alpha, my pack," Theron began, his voice booming with authority. "For weeks, we have harbored a cuckoo in our nest, a danger we could not name. I have sought the truth, for the good of us all, and I have found it." He turned, his arm extending, his finger pointing directly at Mara. "This girl is not who she seems," he declared. "Her mother was no mere rogue who wandered into our lands. She was Lyra of the Shadow Claws, sister to Alpha Valerius himself, cast out by her own blood for daring to mate with one of our warriors." A collective gasp sucked the air from the hall. Theron's voice rose, feeding on their shock. "This girl, who our future Alpha has been inexplicably bound to, carries the blood of our sworn enemy. She is half Shadow Claw." The hall erupted. The whispers of the past weeks became a roar of accusation. "Spy!" a voice screamed. "Half-breed!" another spat. "Traitor!" All the pack's tentative respect for her, earned in the fight against the rogues, vanished in an instant. It was all so clear to them now. Her weak wolf, her secrecy, her outcast nature. She was a poison in their veins. Mara's world tilted, the shouting fading to a dull buzz. She looked at Kaelin, her only anchor in the storm, desperately searching his face for a denial, for defense, for faith. She found none. His face was a canvas of stunned shock. But beneath it was something far worse, a flicker of deep personal betrayal. She had never told him. In all their quiet moments in the archives, in all their shared fears, she had kept the secret of her bloodline locked away, ashamed of the heritage that had always made her feel less. He didn't see her shame. He saw deception. Doubt, cold and sharp, flooded his eyes. That look broke her. The hatred of the pack was a familiar pain, a scar she had lived with her entire life. But his doubt, that was a fresh, gaping wound. The fragile trust they had built, the one pure thing in this cursed existence, shattered into a million pieces. Theron, with his perfectly aimed truth, had won. With the pack shouting for her blood and the man she was starting to love looking at her as if she were a stranger, Mara did the only thing she had ever been good at. She ran. She shoved her way through the enraged crowd, ignoring the hands that grabbed at her and fled the great hall, disappearing into the cold, unforgiving darkness of the night. Chapter 17, The Silver Cage. The forest was a nightmare of tangled roots and whipping branches. Rain began to fall, cold and stinging, mixing with the hot tears that streamed down Mara's face. She ran without direction, propelled only by the need to escape the crushing weight of Kaelin's mistrust. The bond was a screaming agony in her mind, a raw nerve pulsing with his pain, his confusion, his anger. She tried to block it out, to build her walls back up, but it was like trying to dam a river with her bare hands. He thought she was a liar, a spy. After everything, that's what she was to him. She was so lost in her own misery that she didn't sense them until it was too late. Figures emerged from the deep shadows of the ancient oaks surrounding her. She skidded to a halt, her breath catching in her throat. At their center, a ghost in the moonlit rain, was Valerius. He wasn't hunting her. He had been waiting. Theron had set the stage perfectly. "Running from a home that was never yours?" Valerius asked, his voice a silken, pitying murmur. He took a step closer, his silver eyes holding no malice, only a deceptive gentleness. "Don't worry, little bird. I've come to take you to your true family." His warriors closed in. There was no fight left in her. Her body ached. Her spirit was broken. Where could she even run to? The Blackwood pack wanted her dead. Kaelin thought she was a traitor. A cold, grim resignation settled over her like a shroud. Maybe this was for the best. If she was Valerius's captive, Kaelin would have to sever the bond. He would be free. He would be safe from the curse. Her death would be a political act at the hands of a rival, not an intimate murder caused by a fated love. It was a clean break. A final, terrible gift she could give him. As Valerius's warriors took her arms, their grips surprisingly gentle, she looked back one last time in the direction of the lodge. She sent a single, desperate thought down the fractured bridge of their bond, a final, silent plea for him to let her go, to save himself. "Don't come for me. Please." She allowed herself to be led away, a willing prisoner walking toward her own end. A quiet whisper, meant only for the wind and the rain, escaped her lips. "Better your rejection than watching you die for me." Chapter 18. The Impossible Choice. The clearing was a stage, set for a tragedy. Valerius had brought her to a desolate patch of land on the border, a no-man's land between two territories. Theron was already there, his face alight with a triumphant sneer, the mask of the loyal elder finally cast aside. The trap was set. She was the bait. A howl, filled with a rage that shook the very trees, tore through the night. Kaelin. He had come. He burst into the clearing like an avenging storm, his eyes blazing with a fury that was almost feral. He had overcome his doubt, the undeniable pull of the bond and the sheer terror of losing her overriding everything else. His gaze found her, held captive between two of Valerius's guards, and his rage intensified into a palpable killing aura. "Welcome, future Alpha," Valerius said, his voice dripping with condescending charm. "You've arrived just in time for a choice." Theron stepped forward, his smile cruel. "You wish to save your little spy? Your half-breed mate? Then prove your devotion. Claim her. Right here, right now. Complete the bond and show us all the power of your love." The trap snapped shut. Kalen froze, the words hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "Unleash that dark power you showed me in the cavern," Valerius taunted, his eyes glittering. "Show me the true strength of the Blackwood Alpha." "Of course." He let the words hang in the air, savoring the moment. "We all know that completing the bond will turn her heart to ash in her chest. To save her from me, you must kill her yourself." The impossible choice. It hung in the air, shimmering and deadly. He could not fight both Valerius and Theron and their warriors without unleashing the full, devastating power of the curse. But to do so, he had to complete the bond and murder the woman he had come to save. If he fought with his own strength, he would be overwhelmed and they would take her anyway, likely killing him in the process. Checkmate. He looked at Mara, his face a mask of utter, soul-crushing despair. She looked back at him, her own hope extinguished, her heart breaking for the agony he was in. They were trapped, chained by fate to a love that could only end in death. To fight for her was to destroy her. To protect her was to lose her. There was no path to victory. The clearing fell into a deep, profound silence. The villains watched, savoring their perfect, inescapable trap. Kalen and Mara stared at each other across the impossible divide, two souls broken on the altar of accursed love waiting for a storm that promised to destroy them all. Chapter 19. The Witch's Blood. The clearing was a vacuum, all sound and hope sucked out by the impossible choice. Valerius and Theron gloated, savoring their perfect victory. Kalen was a statue carved from agony, paralyzed between saving Mara and killing her. It was in the depths of his despair, watching the torment in his eyes, that a desperate, impossible thought sparked in Mara's mind. It was a flicker of light in the absolute darkness. She thought of the Luna's journal, of the secrets it held, a witch's curse, a nightshade's betrayal, and her own bloodline, a forbidden union between a Shadowclaw and a Blackwood. The pieces had always felt separate, tragic stories orbiting a central disaster. But what if they weren't separate at all? What if they were all part of the same story? The curse was placed on Kalen's ancestor after her own ancestor, a Shadowclaw wolf, had been cast out for mating with the enemy. History said the witch who laid the curse was seeking revenge for a slight from the Blackwood Alpha. But what if that was a lie? A simplified tale to hide a more complex truth? What if the witch was a Shadowclaw herself? A sister, a cousin, a matriarch, seeking vengeance not just on an enemy Alpha, but on the pack that had stolen away one of her own kin. If that were true, if the witch's magic and her own blood were intertwined, then everything changed. The curse was designed to feed on the mate's life force. It was a parasite that killed its host. But what if the host wasn't helpless? What if the mate's blood held the key to the curse's very creation, the power to unmake it? It wasn't about Kalen taking her life to fuel his power. It had to be about her choosing to lend her strength, her blood's unique magic, to face the curse and cleanse it. It was never about fate alone. It had to be about choice. In that instant, the world shifted on its axis. She was not a victim. She was not a sacrifice. She was the key. A new strength, fierce and bright, flooded her veins. She looked at Kalen, her heart open, and sent a single powerful thought crashing down the bridge of their bond. Trust me. His eyes widened, sensing the sudden radical shift in her. She lifted her chin, her voice ringing out in the tense silence, clear and strong, shocking everyone. "You're wrong, Theron," she said, her gaze finding the traitors. "You think this bond is his power and my death. You think fate trapped us." She turned her eyes back to Kaelin, a promise shining in their depths that was so powerful it made him gasp. "You're only half right." She took a deep, steadying breath, her voice resonating with the force of a vow that could remake the world. "If fate chose us, then I choose you back." Chapter 20. A Promise Before Dawn. Her declaration was a stone thrown into a still, dark lake, the ripples of its impact spreading confusion across the faces of their enemies. In the silent, explosive space between one heartbeat and the next, Mara projected everything she suspected down the bond to Kaelin. "My blood isn't a weakness. It's the key. The curse isn't just your burden. It's our story. We have to face it together." Understanding, wild and desperate, dawned in his eyes. It was a gamble of impossible odds, a leap of faith off a cliff in the dark. But it was the only path they had. In that shared, silent understanding, a new plan was forged. A plan of beautiful, defiant madness. They would give their enemies exactly what they wanted. Kaelin's posture shifted. The despair vanished, replaced by a heavy, convincing resignation. "You win, Valerius," he said, his voice rough with defeat. "You want a show? You'll get one." He walked toward Mara, each step a performance of a broken man. Valerius and Theron exchanged a triumphant, hungry look, believing they had finally shattered him. They leaned forward, eager to witness the dark, tragic spectacle they had orchestrated. Kaelin reached Mara, ignoring the guards who held her. He gently took her face in his hands, and the entire world, the clearing, the enemies, the threat of death, fell away. There was only the two of them. "I love you," he whispered, the 3 words a confession he had been forced to hold back for a lifetime. "I am so sorry I ever doubted you." "I know," she breathed, her own tears welling. "I love you too." His forehead rested against hers. This was their moment before the dawn, a raw and sacred promise made in the shadow of the gallows. It was a vow for the future they were about to fight for, a searing, intimate connection that was more real than any physical touch. It was everything. He pulled back just enough to look deep into her eyes, the wild hope and terrifying risk reflected in their depths. "Are you ready?" he murmured, a question that asked if she was ready to bet her very soul on a desperate theory. A steady, certain smile touched her lips. She had spent her life as a victim, a piece on a board moved by others. Not anymore. "I was born ready," she replied, her voice unwavering. She had found her strength, not in solitude, but in this connection. Together, they turned to face their enemies, their hands finding each other, fingers lacing together in an unbreakable grip. They were no longer prisoners of fate. They were warriors about to seize control of their own destiny. Chapter 21. The March of Two. The air in the clearing grew taut, charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the looming fight. It was the energy of a story about to be rewritten. Kaelin, with Mara's hand held firmly in his, turned his full attention to Valerius and Theron. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his lips, a look so filled with predatory promise that it wiped the smugness from their enemies' faces. "You wanted to see the power of our bond," Kaelin said, his voice a low, rumbling growl that was more wolf than man. "So be it." He pulled her against his side, her body fitting perfectly against his as if carved from the same stone. The last pieces of their old, broken selves fell away. They were not the outcast and the cursed alpha anymore. They were a single, united entity, a king and queen standing before usurpers, ready to reclaim their future. There was no fear left in her, only a fierce, burning sense of purpose. Together they took a single, synchronized step forward, and then another. The ground beneath them seemed to hum. A new power began to rise, not just from Kaelin, but from her as well. The curse inside him stirred, a familiar, hungry darkness sensing the imminent completion of the bond. But this time it was not the only power in play. Meeting it, pushing back against its shadows, was a brilliant, defiant light. The pure, untamed magic of her choice, her love, her acceptance. Light and dark, poised for a collision. Valerius and Theron took an involuntary step back. Their triumphant smiles had vanished, replaced by a dawning unease, a flicker of fear. This was not the tragic, soul-destroying spectacle they had planned. This was not the sight of a broken man sacrificing his mate. This was the march of two warriors, united and unbreakable, walking into a fire of their own making, intending to emerge from it reborn or not at all. The final battle was here. Chapter 22. To shatter a curse. The battle erupted. It was a whirlwind of motion and violence, a chaotic dance under the cold light of the moon. Kaelin, a black-furred demon of righteous fury, met Valerius in a clash of sound and fury that shook the ground. Mara, her heart hammering, faced Theron. The elder was surprisingly fast, his movements filled with a wiry strength, his eyes burning with the hatred of a man whose secrets had been exposed. The clearing was a maelstrom of flashing claws and snarled threats. Kaelin fought with a terrible, beautiful control, holding the monster of the curse at bay, relying only on his own strength. Valerius, sensing this restraint, pressed his advantage, his silver form a blur of deadly grace. "Is this all, Kaelin?" the rival alpha taunted, his voice a silken sneer. "Are you afraid to show your little mate what you really are? Afraid she'll see the beast you keep chained inside?" The words were poison-tipped arrows, and they found their mark. Theron used the moment of distraction, feinting left before swinging a heavy branch into Mara's side. She cried out in pain, stumbling. The sound ripped Kaelin's attention from his fight for a single fatal second. It was all the opening Valerius needed. The Shadow Claw Alpha lunged, his claws raking across Kaelin's chest in a brutal silver arc. Kaelin roared, a sound of agony, and collapsed to the ground, shifting back into his human form as he fell. The curse, sensing his weakness and pain, flared violently within him, a dark, hungry thing eager to consume him. Valerius stood over him, a triumphant, lethal shadow ready to deliver the killing blow. This was the moment. The precipice. All of her fear, all of her doubt, burned away, leaving only a core of pure, unshakable certainty. Ignoring her own pain, Mara ran to Kaelin. She fell to her knees beside him, the wet earth soaking through her clothes. She placed her hands over the deep, bleeding gashes on his chest, and with every ounce of her being, she poured her love, her faith, her choice, down the bond. "I claim you, Kaelin of Blackwood," she cried, her voice ringing with the power of an ancient vow. "As my mate, now, and forever." She leaned down and kissed him. The world exploded. The bond, no longer a chain but a conduit, slammed into its final, irrevocable place. A hurricane of power erupted from them. Black, parasitic energy, the essence of the centuries-old curse, poured out of Kaelin. It surged toward her, a tidal wave of darkness intent on consuming her. But her blood, the blood of the witch's own kin, sang in her veins. It did not recoil. It did not break. It met the darkness not as a victim, but as an equal. The magic in her blood didn't absorb the curse. It cleansed it. Light, pure and silver and blinding, exploded from her body. It was a cleansing fire, a purifying flame that incinerated the black energy, turning it to harmless, glittering dust. The resulting shockwave was a physical, concussive blast that hurled Valerius and Theron through the air, leaving them in crumpled, unconscious heaps at the edge of the clearing. Slowly, the light faded. The oppressive, heavy weight that had hung in the air for centuries was gone. The world felt clean, new. Kaelin's wounds, no longer tainted by dark magic, began to heal before her eyes, knitting together with a faint, silvery glow. He looked up at her, his gray eyes clear, free of the shadow for the first time in his life. He reached a trembling hand up to her face, his touch a miracle. "Mate," he whispered, the single word a prayer, a promise, and a beginning. Chapter 23. The Aftermath of Storms. The silence of the clearing was broken by the sound of crashing through the undergrowth. Alpha Borin, Kalen's father, burst through the trees, followed by a dozen of the pack's strongest warriors. They skidded to a halt, their eyes taking in the impossible scene. Their future Alpha, wounded but alive, kneeling with a woman who seemed to glow with a soft residual light. Their most trusted elder and their greatest rival, both unconscious and defeated at the edge of the trees. The truth, stark and undeniable, was written in the devastation around them. "Theron is a traitor," Kalen said, his voice clear and strong as Mara helped him to his feet. His family name was once Nightshade. A collective gasp went through the warriors. The name was a dark legend, a bedtime story used to frighten pups. To hear that the monster from the story had been living among them, advising them, was a profound shock. But they saw the proof lying broken on the ground. They believed him. The pack's healers rushed forward, their hands glowing with soft green light as they tended to Kalen's injuries. Other warriors roughly bound the now-stirring Theron and a groaning Valerius. Alpha Borin, his face a mask of awe, regret, and overwhelming relief, approached Mara. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. "You saved him," the Alpha said, his voice thick with emotion. "You broke the curse. You saved us all." It was an apology for a lifetime of neglect and an acceptance of her place, all in one. The pack warriors looked at her now with a reverence that was completely new. She was not the outcast. She was not the half-breed. She was the Luna who had faced down a centuries-old evil and won. She was their savior. Kalen, ignoring the healer's protests, walked to her side. He wrapped a steadying arm around her waist, a gesture of ownership and pride. He faced his father, his pack, his world, not as a cursed heir, but as the true Alpha he was always meant to be. "She is my mate," he declared, his voice ringing with a love and pride that left no room for doubt. "And she is your Luna." One by one, the warriors, followed by his own father, dropped to one knee. A wave of submission, of loyalty, of devotion, washed through the clearing. For the first time in her 25 years, surrounded by the very wolves who had made her feel so small, Mara felt the one thing she had always secretly ached for, the one thing she never believed she could have. She was home. Chapter 24. By Choice Alone. Later that night, the lodge was finally quiet. The storms had passed. Theron was locked in the deepest dungeon, awaiting pack justice. Valerius, stripped of his pride and bound by a new, unbreakable truce, had been sent back to his own territory in disgrace. For the first time since Mara had woken up in this room, it was a place of peace. Kalen came to her as she stood by the open window, the cool night air washing over her. The bond between them was no longer a frantic, demanding pull, but a gentle, steady warmth that hummed in her soul. A quiet harbor after a lifetime at sea. Their bodies were covered in the fading bruises of battle, but their spirits, finally free, had never felt more whole. He came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He didn't speak, simply held her, his chin resting on her head. They watched the moon climb higher in the sky, two souls finally at peace in their shared silence. "Everything, from now on," he whispered into her hair, his voice soft with a reverence that still made her heart tremble, "is by choice, our choice." He turned her in his arms, his gray eyes, now clear of any shadow, full of a love so deep it felt as infinite as the night sky. She looked back at him, and the broken, bitter girl who had woken up on her 25th birthday was gone. In her place was a woman who had been tested by fate and had chosen to become its master. A woman who had been remade by the very thing she feared most. His lips met hers, not with the desperate sorrow of their first kiss, nor the furious heat of their near miss in the training yard. This was something new. A kiss of profound, tender celebration. It was the slow, deliberate, and deeply emotional union of two souls, finally free to love without fear, without curses, without secrets. It was not a frantic, fated claiming. It was a choice. And as he lifted her into his arms, carrying her toward the bed that had once been her prison and was now to be their sanctuary, she felt the last of her old walls crumble into dust. He hadn't been a curse, she thought, her heart overflowing. The bond hadn't been a cage. They were the key. And love. Love wasn't the thing that had broken me. It was the thing that had finally made me whole.